All right, let's go ahead and get started here. So today we're going to be talking about employer obligations and doing a live portal demonstration for anybody that is new. I know we have several new business managers out there, but I just want to throw this out there before we get started that the material provided is intended to provide general information only and is not intended to be exhaustive, nor does it constitute as tax or legal advice. Any opinions expressed during this presentation are those of me, the speaker, and should not be construed as tax or legal advice or relied upon as such. So really, I am just kind of a nerd that really enjoys benefits and COBRA and making sure people understand what their requirements are, as COBRA is a federal regulation. But as we get started, COBRA is an acronym for the Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1985. Really, in the simplest terms, COBRA is continuation coverage for a qualified beneficiary that would otherwise lose their health coverage due to a COBRA qualifying event. So for the individual or family, COBRA is really a bridge for individuals in a transitional phase in their life. So this is ensuring that they don't face a coverage gap. So if somebody leaves your place of employment, goes on to another employer, say their benefits aren't up until maybe 2 months that they've been gone, they have the peace of mind of knowing that their benefits and medical insurance, dental insurance, vision, and so forth are in place should they have an event and need it. Now, when we talk about qualified beneficiaries, that's going to be the individual employee and or their dependents covered by a group health plan on the day before a qualifying event occurred. So we're going to get more into qualified beneficiaries and what those events are, so on and so forth as we progress here through our presentation. But before we get too far, it's important to understand what benefits qualify for COBRA, because if you offer these benefits, you need to make sure you have a COBRA plan in place. So most commonly, you're going to see medical, dental, and vision. But as you can see, there are several other benefit types that may qualify for COBRA if there is a triggering event. If you are questioning any of your other benefits and if you need to offer COBRA, it's best you review your plan documents and seek legal advice to determine if the benefit you offer is eligible for COBRA. Of course, Omnify can help with any additional COBRA administration that is needed. A lot of times, employee assistant programs or EAP plans are often overlooked, and this is because people just think, oh, it's an EAP plan. It doesn't require, there's no benefits with it. Well, with an EAP plan, if it does more than just offer referral services, you need to make sure that you're complying with COBRA. Even if it's, say, 3 visits with a licensed mental health practitioner, even though it's limited, it still could qualify for COBRA. Now, if your EAP plan is just a referral plan, so it says, look, I'm having a hard time. I reach out to somebody, they help me find somebody that is local or in our network, if they can do that partnered with your medical plan, then again, that is strictly a referral and that would not qualify for COBRA. So it's important to know what plans that you offer and if there is any COBRA requirements with those additional plans. Now, it's important to know that only certain events trigger COBRA. So most commonly, you'll see voluntary or involuntary termination and reduction in hours. Those are probably the 2 most frequent COBRA events that we see in our industry. However, as you can see, there are more events than just those 3 I mentioned, Medicare being one of them. No, we're not diving into Medicare today, but it's important to know that Medicare can be a COBRA event, but very rarely will it be. And that is because most plans cannot end their active medical insurance if somebody qualifies for COBRA. So you may allow your participants to end their active enrollment when they become Medicare age, but most plans, since the Affordable Care Act passed, you cannot terminate someone because of their Medicare eligibility, and therefore very rarely is Medicare a qualifying event, because while you may allow them to end, again, active coverage, they don't have to based on your plan document. And so if they don't have to, then it's not a COBRA qualifying event and does not offer the spouse coverage for 36 months. And gross misconduct is kind of tricky as well. So if you're ever not going to offer COBRA due to gross misconduct, make sure you have legal counsel on your side. And because gross misconduct isn't as black and white as one might think, and you can land yourself in legal trouble for not offering COBRA. So just make sure if you're not going to offer COBRA because of gross misconduct that you seek that legal counsel. And I will say, even if the departing employee says, I'm going on my spouse's plan, I don't need COBRA, you still must enter them into the Omnify portal to trigger their qualifying event, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit. But with COBRA, you don't get to pick and choose what parts of it that you are compliant with. If you're audited by the DOL, they're going to look to see whether or not you're compliant. Pretty black and white there, and they can be very cut and dry if you were to ever have a DOL audit and they start looking into your COBRA management. So kind of as we talked about with COBRA, you must have a qualifying event plus a loss of coverage, and that equals your COBRA event. So again, common question that comes up is someone is dropping an adult dependent during open enrollment. And, how do I enter them into the portal? The short answer is you don't. Just because their benefit ended doesn't mean that COBRA is automatically triggered. Now, another situation that often comes up is dropping a dependent during open enrollment in anticipation of a divorce. In this case, the spouse will have COBRA rights as of the date of the divorce when it's subsequently finalized. So this will create an unusual gap in coverage between the employee dropping the spouse and the divorce being finalized. In almost all other situations, COBRA will provide continuous and seamless coverage, kind of from the point of loss of coverage and going forward. But in the case of a divorce and dropping in anticipation of the divorce, you want to make sure that you are handling that very carefully, because again, during open enrollment, you may not know what types of changes are occurring. And so you might not always know, but if you do know, just make sure you're staying on top of those things. All right, let's talk quickly here. We won't spend too much time on who is eligible for COBRA. So really, that is any person that is losing group health coverage due to a qualifying event. And keep in mind, an employee can only be the qualified beneficiary with respect to the qualifying events of termination of employment or reduction in hours. Also, if a COBRA election is not made within 60 days of the qualifying event or loss of coverage, then the qualified beneficiaries are no longer entitled to COBRA and no longer qualified beneficiaries. And keep in mind, eligibility in the plan is not enough to be a qualified beneficiary. An employee must have been enrolled and covered by the plan on the day prior to the qualifying event. So what this kind of means is, say you have a waiting period, and maybe it's first of the month after one full month of service. So you go through and we're in the month of September. So say somebody is hired in August and you have that waiting period. So their benefits are going to be effective October 1st. Well, if they go through their enrollment and elect their benefits, say they elect them, September 5th, maybe through your HRIS platform or your Ben Admin platform, they elect them. So they've elected coverage, but their coverage is not in place until October 1st. So they make it all the way almost through September, and on September 25th, they terminate. So they've elected coverage, but while they've enrolled in it, their coverage is not effective. So assuming they were not sent their initial COBRA notice, which we'll go through here momentarily, but assuming they weren't sent that, because their coverage was not effective, they are not eligible for COBRA because they weren't covered by the plan on the day before their event. So say they left on the 25th. If they weren't covered on the 24th, then they don't get COBRA. Again, assuming you did not send them their initial notice early. All right. When we talk about qualified beneficiaries, it's important to know that they have independent election rights, and this can get a little bit tricky. So let's kind of talk through it with an example here. So say Jim is employed and he has family medical coverage and the employer was subject to COBRA, meaning they had 20 or more employees, or federal COBRA. That's what we're talking about today. However, his new employer only offers employee-only coverage and no family coverage. So really, what options do Jim's dependents have? Well, Jim's spouse and children can enroll in COBRA with the previous employer, independent of what Jim does. So this is just one example of how the independent election can work, but really it can be any combination of the family unit as long as everyone covered by the plan the day before the qualifying event had the coverage. But we've seen it anywhere from just enrolling the kids in a family situation, just the kids take COBRA coverage, or maybe the spouse and kids, or maybe only the spouse, or maybe one of the kids has a very high medical needs and they just take coverage for one of the children. But again, it's important to know that they have independent election rights. So it's not all or nothing when it comes to COBRA and the family unit. And then if we add another layer,
Katie,
yeah,
if we can go back to the divorce real quick.
sure.
We had a question come in about, so you were talking about like during open enrollment, if somebody was removed prior, in advance of the divorce, we don't know the divorce is happening, but they get removed prior to that.
Sure.
But they get COBRA, of course, due to the divorce, right?
Yes. Yep.
But they didn't have coverage the day before. They
Cor-
weren't covered
correct.
even though the day before, but it was
Yeah.
because they were being
Removed.
removed due to
Yep.
the
And
divorce, right? Can you
correct.
maybe explain that just a little
Yeah.
bit?
Yeah. And federal COBRA regulations kind of make one carve out for that. And they specifically call it in anticipation of divorce. And so oftentimes you may not know until the divorce is finalized, and maybe that employee comes back to you and says, yeah, well, I need to change all my beneficiaries because this divorce has happened, or it has happened. And so that's kind of one of those that you may not know, because open enrollment is largely handled and efficiently handled by benefit administration systems, right? It's all coming through. And so you might not know, maybe their spouse has great coverage at their employer and they decided to go there. You're very right. You may not know that has happened, but once you do know and are notified, if you ever are notified, then that's when you would start asking those deeper questions. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. When was the divorce finalized? We need to make sure that they are offered COBRA. That is a right they have. Even if that employee would say, oh, when I dropped them, they went on their own plan January. If you say you have a plan year that runs 1/1 to 12/31, and they say, oh no, I dropped them because they're going on their own plan, we knew we were separating, that's fine. But in order to be compliant, once you find out about it, you do need to send them their COBRA notice. Oftentimes, from doing benefit administration for several years before I came over to Omnify, oftentimes I would get a call from the former spouse asking about COBRA. And so that's how I would find out. So that is a great question. You may not know, but as soon as you do know, that is when you take action. Brian, does that answer that question that came in?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay,
If
perfect.
not, if you would just follow up on that question, but I think so anyway.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Okay, let's go back to your qualified beneficiaries and how they have election rights.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, Katie, thanks.
All right, so we're going to add another layer, which most often that's not going to too much affect you guys on the client side, more so us on the administration side, but you can have non-qualified beneficiaries. And you might be going, well, wait a minute, what are you saying? And this is because if they're eligible and your plan offers, say, an open enrollment and someone could add dependents during open enrollment that maybe weren't covered the previous plan year, but can be added the new plan year, this would make them non-qualified beneficiaries. And it's important to know that their coverage is not going to be independent of the employee, as in the last example. So our last example, you may remember the employee got coverage at their own employer, but the spouse and children didn't have coverage, so they could go on. But in the example of a non-qualified beneficiary, say that somebody's added during open enrollment, they weren't on the plan when COBRA initially started, they got added during open enrollment. Now you say have employee spouse coverage. Well, if the employee decides to end COBRA coverage, then that newly added spouse during open enrollment that is a non-qualified beneficiary will also lose their coverage. So they can't stay on coverage without the employee because they are a non-qualified beneficiary. Again, something that you may never have to deal with on your side, but it's important to know that they exist, because if you're having those COBRA conversations with somebody, I know there's lots of employees that come with hypothetical questions, and walking through them, it's important to know kind of the ins and outs of a qualified beneficiary versus a non-qualified beneficiary. All right, so now let's take a look at employer obligations. So these are the things that you must do in order to stay compliant with federal COBRA. And again, as I said, these are non-negotiables. To be compliant, you must do these things at a minimum. So what are some of those things that you need to do as we look at this from the employer perspective? So there's two main notices that require action from you as the employer to trigger. And these are going to be the required COBRA notices of the initial general notice. Sometimes it's the initial notice, sometimes it's the general notice, sometimes it's referred to as the initial general notice. Three names for the same notice. And this is when someone is newly enrolled in benefits, so they've never had benefits before, but they've enrolled in a medical, dental, vision, FSA sort of plan, and now they need their initial general notice. The next one is the qualifying event and election notice. Sometimes these are two separate notices. When COBRA is your Omnify administrator, we do the qualifying event and election notice all in the same envelope, so there's no question on what they need to do. And this is just their notice that comes to them that says, hey, you had a COBRA triggering event. Now you need to do this in order to elect COBRA. So during the portal demonstration portion of our presentation, though, I will show you how to trigger both of these notices when we get there. Now, let's kind of dive into these notices, because these notices kind of really kind of trigger everything, and everything kind of starts from here. So when you're talking about the initial notice, I can guarantee that when you send this out, there's somebody that's going to ask you questions. So it's important to know kind of what is this notice for. And so the initial notice is simply letting someone know of the availability of COBRA after a COBRA qualifying event, now that they've enrolled in a COBRA eligible benefit. So remember, not everyone is going to get this notice, because not everyone enrolled in a COBRA eligible benefit. So for example, if an employee only enrolls in life insurance, they're not going to receive this letter, because in the state of Nebraska, life insurance is not eligible for COBRA. The general notice is not something that you have to send every year, but it's important to know that when you do send it, you send it within 90 days after someone has enrolled in their benefits and their benefits are effective. So best way to think about that is 90 days after their benefits are effective, you send out and trigger that general notice in the Omnify system. Now you may be thinking, oh, that's not how I do it. When they enroll in their benefits, I go ahead and trigger the initial notice. That's okay. However, you could be putting your employer kind of at undue risk for having to offer COBRA when COBRA is not necessary. So kind of backtrack a few slides when I said someone has to be enrolled in a COBRA eligible benefit the day before the event happens to be eligible for COBRA, right? There's kind of one caveat to that. If you send them their general notice early and then they terminate before their effective date, you've just now extended COBRA to them. And you might be thinking, well, no, I didn't. They didn't make their effective date. They don't get COBRA. There have been several court cases throughout the years that have come into play where the employer was on the losing end because they sent out that initial notice early. Then the employee terminates thinking they have COBRA because they got their notice that says, hey, I've enrolled in these benefits. If XYZ happens, mainly a loss of coverage with a COBRA qualifying event, that I get COBRA. And so you don't want to put your employer at risk for having to pay claims on someone that you offered COBRA to mistakenly. And so, again, best practice here is to not send that initial notice until after benefits are effective. Again, it's not something you have to send every year. You just have to send it to anybody that is newly enrolled in your medical plan or dental, vision, whatever your COBRA eligible benefits are. If somebody's newly enrolled, you have to send it. There is no requirement to provide it to newly enrolled kids, but if there is say a spouse is added mid-year, whether that's they got married or they had a qualifying life event and added them to their coverage mid-year, you're going to want to make sure you trigger a new initial notice. And again, I will show you how to do that in our portal as well. But just make sure you're not sending the initial notices out early. The second of the required notices is the election notice. And this is sent after a qualifying event has happened. So, take employee termination or reduction in hours. So, but this notice has some very important timing rules that go along with it. So it must be sent within 14 days after the loss of coverage. So that's kind of a hard and fast rule. If you're not sending your COBRA qualifying events, or if you're not entering in folks, say at the end of the week, one day after their termination date, or within 1 month of their qualifying event or contract end date, if you're waiting 1 month, 2 months after benefits end, you are out of compliance because you do only have 14 days to get them into our system to remain compliant. But then once they get their notice and everything kind of comes out, they have 60 days to elect and then 45 days to make a payment before their COBRA coverage is in force. And so, if you take a look at that 60 days and 45 days, you can see that an individual could wait up to 105 days from their loss of coverage to pay for COBRA and have everything backdate to their first day eligible. So again, this is a lot of tracking and timelines to keep up with if you think about managing COBRA. And then, if there's, payment coupons that are sent out and that kind of stuff, you can see that there's a lot to manage with those qualifying events, notices, and the elections. And just know when you partner with Omnify, all you have to do is make sure you get them into the system. Once they're into the system's going to take care of the rest for you to, again, help make sure you are compliant. Okay, now we've got to talk about COBRA coverage itself. So if you offer COBRA eligible benefits to an active employee, you must offer them the same coverage to a COBRA participant. You can't have differing coverage for them. So even if somebody's moving away and you have a very region-specific plan that only certain doctors in your area are eligible for your coverage, if you get outside the coverage area, they're out of network, it's not of any benefit to them. You still have to offer COBRA. So say that Acme Inc. offers only coverage in the Midwest and with only certain providers. So you have an employee that's going to move to the East Coast outside of this region, and they say, you know, I don't need COBRA, it's fine. You don't have to send it to me. I know I only have coverage here, and I'm definitely not coming back to the Midwest when I move into the East Coast. Don't worry about sending it to me. That's great and all, but you have to let them know that, yes, I still have to send you your COBRA notice. Whether or not you take it is up to you, but I still have to send it. What is an address that I can send it to? So make sure you capture any forwarding addresses for them if they are moving. And something else that's often forgot about is open enrollment. I know there's some folks on this call that are kind of heading into their open enrollment season. Make sure you offer COBRA open enrollment to your COBRA enrollees. They get the same option as your active employee population, and they need to be offered their open enrollment as well. Of course, that's all going to be handled on the Omnify platform. And generally, we'll reach out to you. But if you have all of your new plan year information ready to go before we reach out, feel free to reach out to us at cobra@omnifybenefits.com, and we can certainly get those things started early for you. So again, kind of talking about employer obligations in the COBRA coverage timeframe. As an employer, you are obligated to offer COBRA for the maximum coverage timeframe that is allowable based on the type of qualifying event they have. So you don't get to choose how long someone can have COBRA. COBRA regulations are set forth that those maximum coverage timeframes are set in stone. However, you as an employer could choose, maybe in a severance agreement case, where you pay for maybe the first 6 months or something like that. That's fine. You can choose if you're going to pay or not, but you don't get to choose the length of coverage. As I mentioned, how long they can stay on COBRA is based on the type of qualifying event. Think about that the voluntary and involuntary reduction in hours, those are all for the employee. Then if you have a Medicare, divorce, death of an employee, loss of dependent status, those all apply to dependents. So it's important also if you're having a COBRA conversation with an employee, I know they like to ask all those hypothetical questions, right? Make sure you understand as an employer how long they could have COBRA if they're inquiring about that. There is the 29-month for total disability. Again, that's mostly affects the employee, and they have to be disabled within the first 60 days. That's a Social Security Administration determination of disability. So that's nothing that Omnify chooses. That person will work through the Social Security Administration on that disability determination. Again, it has to happen within the first 60 days of COBRA, but if it does and they receive the proper paperwork, it is going to last, make their COBRA last for up to 29 months. Not to scare anyone, but there are very real penalties for COBRA noncompliance. And it's important to know if you're a new business manager or a new benefits administrator that you understand that there are penalties if you choose not to comply with COBRA. And sometimes it's not a choice, you just didn't know. But the IRS has set forth the excise tax penalty, and that's $100 per day for each qualified beneficiary, $200 per day if more than one family member is affected. And the minimum tax levied by the IRS for noncompliance after a kind of discovery of a notice of examination is $2,500. The maximum for even unintentional failures. And it's interesting to me that they call out unintentional, right? You might not understand or realize that you need to do it. You didn't do it on purpose, but it's not unintentional, is the lesser 10% of the amount paid during the preceding tax year by the employer for group health plans, or up to $500,000. So we're talking very real money here. There's also DOL ERISA penalties, and that is $110 per day per participant for failing to provide the initial COBRA notice or the general notice. And so also ERISA can hold any fiduciary personally liable for non-compliance. So just to make sure, if you have COBRA eligible plans, which I'm thinking everybody that's on this call probably does, just make sure that you are doing the minimum, and that's getting them into our system so they get their COBRA notices. Once they're in the system, you have the peace of mind of knowing that Omnify is going to take care of the rest. One employer obligation that is overlooked time and time again is when dependents age out. So most often this is going to be when a dependent is turning age 26. And in order to remain compliant with federal COBRA, employers must send the aging out dependent a COBRA election notice. Now, often you won't know their address. They could be moved out. They could be in grad school somewhere at age 26. You don't know, but it's perfectly acceptable to send it to your employee or their parents' address, assuming the parent is going to get them that information. I will say, for anyone that is on this call that is part of the EHA, I know that Blues Enroll has alerts set up to let you know when a dependent is aging out of medical and dental. So just make sure you're checking your Blues Enroll every couple of weeks to see if you have any dependents that are aging out and turning age 26 and then need to be entered into the Omnify system. If you have any questions on where that is at within the Blues Enroll system, I will have you reach out to the EHA team at Blue Cross Blue Shield for that. I'm sure many other carrier systems such as Blues Enroll have other notifications when someone is turning age 26. So just make sure if you have any kiddos that are turning age 26, if you're not monitoring that inside your place of employment, that you are checking on your carrier platforms for those notices. All right, we are going to switch gears here and take a look at our portal here.
And Katie, if you don't mind, I'm going to actually pause you.
Sure.
And let's do some questions that relate to kind of the information side of what we've gone over.
Sure.
And then we'll go into the portal demo.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay, I've been holding a couple, so I apologize. Well, let's talk about the initial notices. There were a couple of questions that came through for the initial
Sure.
notices.
Let me back the slides up here.
Initial notices, if benefits start on the first day of employment, they're good just to enter them in and send that initial notice right away, right?
Yep. If they've elected and enrolled in benefits and they started day one, yes, go ahead and get that out the door, but within 90 days. Yep.
Perfect. And then on the kind of same thing on the initial notice, there's a question if the employee pays 100% of the premiums, what's the risk of sending the initial notice right away, even if they don't make it to their enrollment date?
If the employee pays 100%?
Yep, if the employee is paying 100% of the premiums, what's the risk? So they elect coverage, but then they leave before their start date of benefits. Is there a risk to the plan or anything to send that initial notice before?
Sure. So I would say if the employee is paying 100% of the premiums, but it would be a claims risk. Now, would go out on a limb and say they're probably talking about like vision, right? So a lot of vision policies out there, they don't, employee pays 100% of everything. They pay the 100% of the premiums. If they need glasses, there's certain benefits that might offer a discount. But sending it early, that could just put you at potential for having to offer the plan, the coverage to somebody that doesn't need it, and the insurer, right? So most general, I think in Nebraska here we see like Emeritus, right? They could refuse coverage because the person didn't make their eligibility date. So they could refuse coverage, and you as the employer then would be liable for any of their costs. So, or covering the discount on their vision insurance. And so that's really the risk. And they could take you to court. I mean, I know, say, a whole family was planning on getting glasses. You sent them the notice, something happened and they terminated. Yes, they pay 100% of those benefits, but you are then putting yourself at risk to say, hey, we will cover, maybe they get $120 credit on each family member's vision insurance, right? That would be they get a credit, everybody that's on that plan. And so, yes, they pay 100% of those premiums, but now if it's a family of four, you're paying $120 times four to offer them that discount now because, the insurer is going to say, well, no, they're not eligible for this discount. They didn't make their eligibility date. And that is perfectly legal for the insurer or carrier to deny coverage. And so sending it early is putting your employer at risk to having to cover those benefits. So yes, there is definitely very real risk to sending that information early.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. Thanks for answering that, Katie.
Perfect. Anything else, Brian?
Yep. So the other, the qualifying event notice.
Yep.
So you talked about that there's a 14-day deadline. Is that from the day that they leave or from their benefits end date? So a lot
Yep.
of folks, they've got that, benefits go throughout the end of the month. But if they leave at the beginning of the month, but coverage is paid through to the end, do we have until the end of the month, or do we need to do it from the date that they actually leave? When's that
Yep.
14-day time frame start?
Yep. Really, that 14-day time frame starts as soon as coverage ends. So you've
Perfect.
got 14 days if they leave at the first of the month, but benefits don't end until the end of the month. Yes, you've got 14 days from the end of the month. However, I would say we all know everybody's busy. To avoid questions and phone calls from the departing employee, the sooner you can put them in our system, the better, because that's going to get that qualifying event notice out into the mail and out to them. So yes, you have 14 days from the date that they lost their benefits, but it's a better experience for that participant and quite frankly, less phone calls for you to deal with if you get it. The sooner, the better, right?
Absolutely.
Again, we'll talk about it. And we've said it several times throughout our webinars in the last 24 months, 18 months, is just make sure for this qualifying event notice that you get it out. Best recommendation is 1 day after they terminate. Again, that's because if they decide to stay, which is great, you don't want to create extra work for yourself having to undo everything that you put in. And also, you don't want to get caught in a situation where you send it out too early. So don't put somebody in any more than 30 days ahead of maybe a contract end date. I know there's some employers on this call that have contract end dates. So best recommendation is 1 day after their termination date to put them in. I know we have several employers that are like, hey, I do it on Mondays after, assuming a lot of terminations happen on the week before, they put it in each Monday is kind of their process. But no sooner than 30 days ahead of a contract end date.
Super. One quick follow-up on the divorce situation. I think we have this must be a real life example here. So we had an employee remove their spouse for open enrollment 2022, right?
Okay.
but then their divorce wasn't finalized until the end of 2023.
Okay. Yep.
So is there a statute of limitations on there, or are we still going back and adding them in on at the end of
Yep.
2023?
Yep. Divorce is finalized at the end of 2023. We would go in and add them so they have their coverage. Yep.
Perfect.
Again, that's kind of where you get into the practicality of when the again, opinions are of my own, but when you know, sometimes when the IRS and the DOL is involved in some things, not realizing the timing of things, right? That was definitely, you know, almost a whole year that they didn't have coverage, but now that the divorce is finalized, go ahead and send out that qualifying events notice for divorce.
Perfect.
Chances are that divorcee probably already has coverage in place, but again, that keeps your plan compliant.
You've dotted your I's and crossed your T's.
Yes, you got it, Brian.
Good. And then I think Stephanie is setting us up here for a great answer. So we might need to send her a swag bag, but she's asking on our portal, after adding a COBRA event, is there anything else as an employer that we need to do?
Well, goodness, gosh, Stephanie, you teed us up perfectly into our demo. And the answer is no. You have the peace of mind of once you get them added into our portal, we've got it from here. We'll take care of it. The portal is going to take care of it, and there's nothing that you need to do. So let's jump in here and take a look. When you jump into your portal, you are going to be given your dashboard. From here is really all of those transparency tools that help you with your COBRA plan. Again, our hope is that we are able to take care of things on our side. We have a call center for participants to call, but you are their trusted resource. And as their trusted resource, if they call you, you have the tools you need at your fingertips to go take a look at their record. So let's just kind of keep going with Stephanie's scenario here, and we'll just start with a COBRA event. So we've got our 3-minute 7-step wizard. We are just going to start building in what that record is. So if we are here on Monday the 23rd, we'll go by our best recommendation and we'll say we had a termination on the 20th. We're now going to put them in. Is this a second qualifying event? Is it a disability extension? Have they been tracked in another system? These are all defaulted to no, so you can skip right over them, because I will tell you, if it's a second qualifying event, a disability extension, or if it's somebody that's tracked in another system, Omnify has already taken care of that and Omnify is involved. So if you find yourself with a disability extension or a second qualifying event, ask them that question. Have you talked to Omnify yet? Did you call Omnify? Have them reach out to us so we can handle that for you. We really want to take the COBRA load off of your shoulders. So again, going through our 7-step 3-minute wizard, we've got our event and our qualifying event date. Now, if we click on next, now we're going to build in our employee information. So again, we can copy and paste into our system, which really makes it a little bit faster and a little more efficient. So if you have your Ben admin system, you can copy and paste. I know there are some websites that are locked out and don't allow a paste or a copy. Ours is not one of them. Again, it helps you efficiently get through and navigate the website. So imagine if you have different regions or classifications, whether it's certified, administrative, whatever that is. If you have that, you'll choose that. You can start to build in a one-stop shop for all your record. If you have a hire date and a termination date and rehire, you can add all those in. Assuming we don't need those, we're going to add in those first 4 pieces and continue moving right along. Now we're on to step 3. Now we got to build in what benefits did they have. So we'll choose the benefits they have. We'll choose the coverage tier and keep moving right along here. And so there we go. We've only got let's do employee spouse for dental. So we're going to keep going here. And now it says, who's our primary participant? Well, based on our event information, we chose voluntary termination. So they chose to leave. We always tie back to the employee because not always is it the employee that is the primary participant. but because it's an employee termination, it is the employee. So we are already defaulted here to the employee. So we have Peter Parker in here. We need to get Peter's address in here. So we'll just, again, copy and paste. We are tied in with the United States Postal Service with the postal code. So as long as we put in their postal code and click out, city and state's going to pop in. If you can give us a phone number, that is always best in case we need to make outreach to them. So we've got all of that information in there. Choose the gender, and now we need a date of birth. Again, you can copy and paste or key it in, click out. It's going to format it for you. More optional fields. And one last question here was, okay, did they have, or this, okay, yep, that's the coverage. All right, now we need a dependent. Keep in mind, in order to have a complete record, you have to have the dependents listed. So we said they had spouse coverage here. So we are just going to add in a spouse. We can add in social security number. They live at the same place, so we're just going to use the same address. And now we've got our spouse record in there. Date of birth is optional. Again, if you can give us that, these are all tools that we will certainly use to help identify the people that we are talking with as well. And it says, okay, what plans did they have? Well, based on the tiers that we chose a couple steps ago, it's saying she only has dental, which is perfect. That lines up with exactly what we had. We're going to add our dependent. Now we've got Amy added in here. Is there a subsidy? 99.9% of the time you are going to skip over this, being that this is where you as the employer would cover this. Now, one caveat here is if there's anybody on the call that's with the EHA, you won't ever enter in a subsidy, even if you are paying your premiums, because Omnify pays Blue Cross Blue Shield directly. You do need to pay Omnify explicitly for those premiums. Reach out to us at cobra@omnifybenefits.com, and we can certainly work through what that looks like. That's why I say 99.9% of the time you're going to skip over the subsidy. But if you need to give a subsidy, if you're not part of the EHA group, say you get a severance package and it says that you are going to cover 100% of the medical cost for the first 6 months. That's perfectly fine. You will start on month 1 and you're going to end on month 6. What this does is this gives you or the participant coupons for each month through the end of the plan year. And this way, ending in month 6 would give Peter Parker a coupon on month 7 that shows his exact premiums that are due. So 1 through 6 would be 0, and then month 7 would be his full premium. But assuming we're not going to put in a subsidy, we're just going to come back out here, click close, and we're on to next. Okay, so here's where we're just going to review and submit. So really, it's not a step to make an entry, but it's just saying, okay, qualifying event was the 20th. Who had coverage? So we can see here all of that information that we put in. We can see what their total is, and we're going to submit that participant. If we need to view that participant, we certainly can. If we need to go look up a participant, so if we go look up Chris, so this is where Stephanie said, once I put somebody in, is there anything else I need to do? Nope. So we have our qualifying event in here with Chris. We can see here, because Chris has been enrolled for a while, we can see that there's been election confirmations, payment coupon books, lots of letters mailed out to Chris, and that's where you have the peace of mind that the system is going to take care of it. We can see here that there's already a couple notices set up to pending. So assuming we don't get our next payment, if we go look here, we can see that October hasn't been paid for. We have that other letter to say, okay, end date is December 31st. If you don't make a payment, we've got early termination for you based on your setup. So again, the answer is no, there's nothing you need to do. So that was kind of backwards where we started with the COBRA event. That was the end of our employee life cycle, but let's take a minute and go back to the beginning. If we need to go back to the beginning and we need to trigger that initial general notice, you're going to click add a new hire. Now, remember, this isn't all new hires that we are adding. We are only adding those that have enrolled in benefits and are newly enrolled. So they've never been with our employer group here. They've never enrolled in benefits. So we will put in, and we don't necessarily have to have a social security number if we have an employee ID, but we'll go ahead with the social security number. We will put in our address here, and as we put it in, again, we're tied in with the USPS. So I just put in the zip code for Crete, and Crete popped up. Making sure we don't have any other thing. Oh, I see region or classification, you can imagine, is there. And this is already defaulted to no for you. If you want to have one system of record, you could certainly put in their hire date based on your parameters at your employer. But again, that is optional down here. So we've got those 5 pieces of information added. So we're just going to click Add Employee. Now, one question that we get often is, I can't find my employee under the employees section. I can't find them. I need to add a qualifying event. Know that our system does not tie to the qualifying event from the employee. Think of COBRA as an umbrella with 2 pillars underneath it. You have your initial notice that has its own federal record requirements with it. So if they're put in as an initial notice, they stay in initial notice, and you just have to go in and add them as a COBRA qualifying event. Again, it does not link them back and forth. If you have, just like I went in here and we just added Peter Parker, if we go look, we can go look up Parker and see, nope, Parker's not over here on this side. Uh-oh. That was non-compliance on my part, right, for ABC demo, because Peter Parker had benefits. I said Peter had medical, employee, spouse, dental, and vision, employee only, but I didn't get Peter his initial notice. So technically, I'm out of COBRA compliance with ABC demo because Peter Parker is not in here. So that's just where you kind of think of the initial notice as the beginning chapter of the employee lifecycle book, and the qualifying event notice as the ending chapter. So you just kind of want to make sure that you get those taken care of at the beginning of employment and at the end. Here, if we go look at reports, know that you have your reports that are delivered to you on a monthly basis. But if you're ever wanting to go see, you can certainly go in and enroll. You can pull an enrollment census report and capture any of that information that you are looking for. So I just went back to the month of August here, and we can see that our only enrollee, once this loads, this is our test system, so it does load a little bit slower. As it loads here, maybe there we go. We can see that we have Jennifer Lawrence, we have Chris Hemsworth and his family. And again, if you look at these participant IDs, these will show you exactly who they belong to. So we know that Cy here goes with Jennifer Lawrence. We know that this is Chris Hemsworth family, and so on and so forth. Again, you can export those. These are fully dynamic, so if you need to send out a mail merge, I know we have Medicare Part D notice timeframe coming up. If Omnify is not sending that out to you, that would be an extra expense to you that you would have chosen upon setup. But if Omnify is not doing that, you can certainly clear out all of this and then get yourself a report by, if we do coverage, we can get primary, first name, last name, address, city, state, zip code. Now we've got a report. Yes, we'll have to remove some duplicates, but we've got a report that once we export it into Excel, we remove duplicates and we're already in a mail merge format. So you can quickly print labels or print onto your envelopes and get those required notices out the door. Brian, we've got 3 minutes left here. Any other questions that have come in?
We just had a question pop in, and it is a question that I was going to cover, so I'm so glad that you put it in. And it's talking about the folks that were on PayFlex last year. And yes, so if you were on PayFlex and you had employees that received their initial notice from PayFlex, they will not be in on your employee section. So yeah, you will not see those employees when you click on employees.
And nor do you have to add them. You don't have
Correct.
to add them because they've already, our assumption was at takeover because Payflex would not provide us with takeover information for those folks, that the assumption is they received their required notice. So no, they're not going to be in here. But like I said, if that person would have a qualifying event, you don't have to link them to anything. You just need to go add the COBRA event and you're ready to go. Great question.
Yes, very good question. Thank you, folks.
All
And yeah, that question came in a couple times. And so, yeah, I think we got it covered. I don't
okay.
see any last minute. So
All
unless
right.
anything pops in here, I think we're,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. We'll keep on going here. If you think of something though, feel free to add it to the Q&A. But just some tips to remember as we wrap up here. Not all qualifying events are a COBRA qualifying event. So make sure that you understand what qualifying events trigger COBRA and know that it has to be a COBRA triggering event and a loss of coverage to trigger the COBRA election notice. As I mentioned, you're not going to enter in all new hires, only those that are hired and enroll in eligible benefits and their benefits are effective. Then you can go ahead and get them in for their initial notice. In the essence of time and efficiency, make sure you copy and paste just so you can get those entries in a little bit faster. If you do have an employee that does have a COBRA qualifying event, enter them in one day after their termination or event date, but no earlier than 30 days ahead of their contract end date. And don't forget about their dependents. Dependents must be entered in to have a complete COBRA notice. And as we wrap up here, just some information. We're located right here in Lincoln. So if you have some questions for us, feel free to give us a call. We've got plenty of resources out here on our employer resource page. For those of you with the EHA, on the EHA website, we have a section of demos and information out there for you. While we are in Lincoln, know that mailed payments are processed at our lockbox in Boston. I know that call happens sometimes to employers like, hey, this is COBRA, but it says I'm mailing it to Boston. Yes, that's true. That is where our lockbox is. The best way to reach the COBRA team is cobra@omnifybenefits.com. That ensures we get your questions addressed timely. If you need to give us a call or your participants need a call, there's our number. And then, of course, remember there are 2 different websites for the portal, one for you and one for those participants. I know we have some attachments out there that we said that we would get going, and
I was not smart enough to figure out how to get that. So if it's okay, I've got a list of the attendees today and I will email those out.
sounds great. One
All
of
right.
those was a flow chart on just how to proceed through COBRA and when to go into the COBRA portal, and the other one is what do employers need to know about COBRA. So we'll get that to your inbox with our list here. So if you need it, you can definitely take it. If not, you can just go ahead and hit delete. With that, everyone, thank you for hanging on with us. I know we went a little over time here. If you have questions, just send them to that cobra@omnifybenefits.com. We'll get those answered for you. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks.